This is World History 1, Chapter 2, Segment 3. Egyptian culture. The Egyptians' religion was polytheistic. As we said before, polytheism is belief in many gods. The chief god for the Egyptians was Ra. He was the god of the sun. Osiris was the god of the dead. Anubis was the god of the underworld. Isis was the god of mothers and wives. And there were 2,000 other gods. Uh, During the afterlife, your heart was weighed. They would take a typical scale, similar to one you'd see with Lady Justice, with a lever in the middle and bowls on either end. And on one end, your heart would be placed. On the other, a feather would be placed. If your heart weighed more than the feather, you would go down into Hades. If it not, you'd go into their version of paradise. Now, yes, physically speaking, no matter what you do, a heart can never equal as much as a feather. But for the Egyptians, for every bad deed you did, your heart got heavier, more dense. For every good deed you did, your heart got lighter, became less heavy. So the more good deeds you did, the better off you would be. And if your good deeds obviously outweighed your bad deeds, then you would have a very light heart. If your heart was heavy, then this multi-headed dog known as the Devourer of Souls would devour your soul and chase you around throughout the afterlife in the other world. Part of the Egyptians' afterlife, they believed that you took things with you when you died. A, your body, and B, possessions, which is why the Egyptians used the process of mummification. Mummification is the process of preserving a dead body. The way that it went in ancient Egyptian culture was they would remove all of the internal organs. They would take a small rod, looked like a shepherd's staff, put it through the nasal cavity up into the brain, scramble around, and then pull the brain out through the nose. And then they would open up and they would take out all of the rest of the internal organ out of the body, and some of them would be preserved in jars to be taken into the afterlife. And the reason that they did this is, once again, they believed that they would take things from this world with them to the next, and their body was one of them. So if your body was defiled or not preserved, then obviously it could not continue into the next life. It's another reason why the pharaohs were buried in pyramids with lots of gold and weapons and everything else to be used in the afterlife. And another reason why the pyramids have several booby traps, so the grave robbers could not steal those items from them. And most of the information that we get about the Egyptians and their afterlife comes from the Book of the Dead, which tells about lots of the funeral process and describes the other world. Still to this day, historians do not know the actual process of mummification. We know some of the things, but not every step-by-step detail. So still today, people cannot be mummified the way the Egyptians do. They do have various ways of preserving the dead that are just as good and in some ways better, but not the same process. Daily life for people in ancient Egypt. At the top of the social classes was the king, the queen, and then the royal family, which is a little bit different than the Sumerians, who at this point would also have the priests up top. In Egypt, they would not be at the same class as the king and queen. In the next tier were the landowners, high-ranking government officials, priests, and then your army commanders. Below them would be merchants or artisans. So these would be wealthy tradespeople or skilled laborers, people who could make very good pots, jewelry, things like that. And below them were peasants, people who worked for other people, either in shops or on farms, or people who owned their own small farms, and then laborers. And then below them were slaves, who were most often prisoners of war. In Egypt, you were not locked into your social classes. You could move up or down. You could do this by marriage, money, getting a better job, so on and so forth. Also very different when in respect to other ancient cultures. Women had some equal rights. They could own property. They could find their own marriage. They could divorce. And if they did divorce, they were given 1/3 of all property. The ancient Egyptians had a written language. They were hieroglyphics. They were symbols and pictures to represent words. The Egyptians are also credited with inventing papyrus, which comes from a reed that grew in and around the Nile River, and that would be mashed out, pressed into something similar to paper, but a little bit different. It was easier to produce and make than parchment, which means that record keeping was more efficient than in other ancient civilizations. Here you have an example of the ancient Egyptian alphabet through hieroglyphics. Here you have letters to represent pictures to represent letters or sounds. You will notice that some of them are the same because they can have the same sound. And if you would like, at this point, you can write your name in hieroglyphics, though you don't have to. Inventions and technology. One of the main things the Egyptians are credited for is the solar calendar, which is very close to today's calendar, and it's based on the rotation of the sun. They also had written numbers. They used mathematics and geometry, as is clearly evident in their building of the pyramids. They also had achievements in medicine as well. They were able to take people's pulses. They used splints to set broken bones. They had herbs and salves to put on wounds so they didn't get infected. And then they had herbs and other medicines to help reduce fever. Invaders controlled Egypt. So over time, the pharaohs began to become weak and ineffectual. The Middle Kingdom begins to rise after the fall of the Old Kingdom. This happens from 2040 to 1640 BC, and you see a rise in the power of the pharaohs and Egypt as a whole. During this time period, a canal was built from the Nile River all the way to the Red Sea. Dikes and other improvements were made along the Nile River to prevent flooding or to help with irrigation, and drainage swamps were made to prevent floods from destroying villages. Then in 1640 BC, a group of people known as Hyksos invade, and in 1523, Hyksos completely controlled Egypt, ending the Middle Kingdom. Next, we're going to switch and talk about planned cities along the Indus River, which is in India. First, we'll talk about the geography of the Indian subcontinent. We're talking about India here. The mountain ranges are in the north. There's a desert in the east. These act as barriers to prevent hostile tribes from invading the region. Both the Indus and Ganges rivers form a very fertile plain, and once again, as you've seen, just like with the Sumerians and just like with the Egyptians, those rivers bring about silt, which makes the land around them very fertile. Silt is very important to all ancient river valley civilizations. And then the Deccan Plateau, it also acts as a barrier, similar to the way that the mountain ranges in the north do. Here you have a map of the part of India that we're talking about. This light green area is all the Indus River Valley. Here you see the Indus River, and then over here the Ganges River. And the main place we'll be talking about is Harappa. That is one settlement in the Indus River Valley, but it will be the largest, most popular, and all the other river valley civilizations will model themselves after the Harappans. One thing in India that is different than the other river valley civilizations are monsoons. Yes, we've seen flooding in the Tigris and Euphrates rivers and with the Nile River, but they don't have monsoons. They have a rainy season, not monsoon. Here's how the monsoons work. From October to February, so basically our winter months, a northeastern dry air moves in from the northeast and moves west. Okay, so warm, dry air moves west. From June to October, okay, winds from the southwest move east. When these winds, this hot, dry air meets this, when this warm, moist air meets this cold, dry air, they're going to mix and twist, similar like a tornado or a funnel cloud, and this is going to cause the monsoon season, which are going to cause flood. Monsoons are rainstorms that just keep on going. They rain perpetual downpour for days, even weeks on end, which cause massive floods in these areas. And these floods bring about silt. The problem here is that it's very unpredictable. Now, you knew when the Nile was going to rise and fall. The monsoons, you could have a very harsh year, you could have a very light year. It would constantly change. You never knew how much the rivers were going to flood. On top of that, the flooding could become so bad that the course of the river could be changed. All of a sudden, it could run from east to west, and then because of so much flooding, the water then goes, instead of going from east to west, goes northeast to northwest, which could completely change the geography, the climate for one area. If you live next to a river and you use it for irrigation and everything else, and then all of a sudden that river dries up because it's changed course, your village can no longer prosper. You're going to have to move to another village. So civilizations begin to emerge on the Indus River. Scientists know less about this region than other ancient river valleys. They had a language. The problem is that there are no bilingual tablets to translate it with. What do I mean by that? Well, for the Egyptians, we have texts that are in both Egyptian and Latin. And we can translate English or Latin into English, which means we can translate the hieroglyphics into Latin and then English following suit. We don't have anything like that for the Indus River Valley civilizations. So they had a language, they used symbols similar to hieroglyphics. We don't know what any of the words or letters meant. The first inhabitants of the Indus River may have come by boat from Africa and then migrated into the region. Another theory is that they traveled by land over the mountains and settled in the Indus River Valley. What we do know is that by 2500 BC, there were planned cities along the Indus River, and they used levees. Levees are like dikes or banks on the river, but much higher, much more sophisticated to hold back more massive amounts of water. Because as we said, the monsoons could rain so much that they could change the course of a river, so you would need a levee to hold back that water. The largest cities in the Indus River were Calabagnan, Mohendare, and Harappa. Harappa is the city and the people that we're going to study most.